Welcome to Pure Conversations Weekly News Roundup IWC News, where we sort through the news so you don't have to. I'm your host Joseph Miller, and this week we're joined by co-host Noah Montag.
Okay, first off, I'd like to discuss, of course, um, the vaccine was announced. Apparently,
For coronavirus,
it's a 90% effective. They're still in early stages in development. We don't know yet where everyone's going to get it, when it's going to be universal, if everyone's going to get it. We still don't have complete details. Lots of people are reporting very different things, but I think it's interesting to note that during the debates, probably 50%, I don't know the exact number, but there was a lot of discussion on coronavirus and dealing with the coronavirus. And I think it's very interesting that that was the focus, and as opposed to many other topics. For example, foreign policy, I had very little time spent on discussing foreign policy, China trade deals. There were a couple of points that were discussed, and there's certainly certain viral points were made on both sides, on Trump and Biden. But it's very interesting to note that it might be that a lot of the debates, a lot of the policies that we spoke about from either candidate are not necessarily going to be super relevant going forward. Whoever takes over, whoever is nominated, whoever finally becomes president, it might not even be mattered by the time, maybe certainly within the first year of presidency. It is likely that these vaccines are going to be widespread, and we wouldn't have to worry about coronavirus. So it's interesting to see how we spend so much time thinking about these one policies, and we didn't focus on other policies, and we don't necessarily know the other candidates' policies.
So yeah, Joseph. I mean, it's Noah Montag. Obviously, Joseph introduced me, but I just want to interject here is that clearly there will be a COVID vaccine, presumably by the end of the year. The data is looking very good, and it will be really great news for the world in general. But it does not seem plausible that we're really going to have COVID completely out of the common discourse and affecting our everyday life until earliest the third quarter of 2021. However, something that people aren't discussing, but we don't know how it's going to be, is that will COVID mutate? And so yes, that there is a vaccine, and that's great news, and that will definitely help us a tremendous amount. But we don't know if this could be COVID could become something like the flu, where it comes back every single year. And obviously, I'm not trying to be a pessimist, and I'm hoping for the best news. However, it's not just a vaccine, and then we're saying goodbye to COVID. If the vaccine is a first step towards a larger process.
I think that's a lot of hypotheticals, though, meaning we don't know. I have not yet necessarily, or I've not yet heard about significant mutations. Every few months, especially when this first started, I would hear about, there's a new strain or whatever, but none of it seemed to stick. It could be, and it could not be. I don't think we know enough.
We definitely do not know enough. Obviously, infectious disease experts are still confused by the COVID virus. However, it is reasonable to assume that we are not going to go back to our everyday habits, at least in the beginning to middle of 2021. And we're looking at regular life, in quotes, coming back later in 2021 at the earliest.
Correct, but if even with that point, it's still fair to say, even if it takes till the end of the first year of the next president's first term, I think it's important to note that that's 1 out of 4 years. Obviously, it's very significant, but a president does more than just handle COVID. There's financial policy, there's international policy, the foreign policy. Really, the president, especially with the power of executive orders, especially with how overreaching it's become for both Republicans and Democrats, maybe more so for certain Democratic presidents than Republican, but certainly on both sides, it's expanded the power of the president. And being that the powers of the president pretty much involves almost everything at this point.
Well, I mean, I just interject with you, Joe. So
yeah, go ahead.
Republicans and Democrats alike have taken executive orders to a whole new degree in the past
Agreed.
years because of the polarization of Congress. And something that we'll speak about later is exactly what a Biden presidency is going to look like, which we
Agreed.
really don't know, because if if a President Biden faces a Republican Congress, we just have no idea what he's going to do, because his plans were not meant for a Republican Congress. They were meant that he was have full control of the government and they'd be able to pass some very ambitious reforms. But we'll get into that later.
Agreed. I was just saying that being that the presidency has become more and more powerful, it's even more important to know more than just how they'll deal with coronavirus, because being how much power they do have, I would like to know, yes, Biden, but also Trump. I would like them to speak about other things, or for example, the national deficit. There was zero talk about the deficit, this election cycle. Zero. I think that's something significant. It's also another very long-term prospect. Lots of topics that were spoken about 4 years ago didn't even make it to the table because of coronavirus. And I just think it's significant that with an end in sight to coronavirus and a president being decided without taking into account what we might be facing second year, third year, fourth year into a presidency, we don't know what to be expecting. So that's really what I wanted to discuss in regards to the coronavirus vaccine. Now, in terms of the election, there were a lot of accusations of
By the way,
fraud.
just in terms of the COVID vaccine, just to add, is that we will be receiving data within the next very few days about the Moderna vaccine. And what it doesn't necessarily matter if it's going to be how effective it is. Obviously, it does. But in terms of the point of having another vaccine is that the Pfizer vaccine, first of all, it's very difficult to distribute. So that's why it's going to take so long to send it out. But number two is that the Pfizer can only make a certain amount of vaccine. However, Moderna will be able to give another batch of vaccine, which will help quicken the process and enable more Americans and more people around the world to get faster. So that's the big thing about another vaccine having the same sort of acceptability as the Pfizer one does. So that's something very much to look out for, because if we have two vaccines, it will make a big difference on when you can get it versus one vaccine.
Just important to know, when Noam says that we are going to be hearing from Moderna, he doesn't mean us. He means just in general. Everyone's going to hear together. Unfortunately, we're not in a place where we get to hear first quite yet.
Oh, I thought we are, Joseph. You sure?
I'm pretty sure. I mean, I don't want to yet say how many listeners we had to our previous podcast, but I'd be pretty surprised if the people at Moderna heard about it. All right. Speaking of Moderna, I'd like to discuss election fraud. Now, people are touting election fraud. People are touting there was no election fraud. It's hard to really say. I think there are a couple of notable things that have happened in terms of issues with the elections that should be discussed. And it should also be discussed how it might actually impact the election, meaning, is it enough? Does it make a difference? Do we need to care? So first, I saw that there was a senator, I believe a state senator in Michigan, who there was a glitch in the system, and somehow he went from losing by 104 votes to winning by over 1,000 votes. And I think, and the reason that was stated was because the system miscounted or double counted 7 voting departments, or whatever they're called. I think that is somewhat significant. That's a lot. It's obviously not clear how widespread that is. It's also not clear if that's enough to even sway another group of sway any other seats anywhere else. But I think it's significant that in terms of when the media calls a state one way or the other, and a specific state, especially Michigan, and it's true, likely Biden won Michigan. There was a humongous margin. There are likely not that many glitches, but in a state where we really don't, where we have seen significant issues, and we don't know yet what to expect. There has been, I think, calls for a recount. I think it's significant to say that nobody should be calling places like Michigan. We know where it's leaning. We think it's it's unlikely that the current president can flip back Michigan, but I think in terms of responsibility, I think it's important to wait to see what the issues are. An example of which came up very recently in terms of where people thought there were issues and there weren't issues. So recently, Tucker Carlson spoke about certain dead people voting, um, and he claimed and two of the people he listed who were supposedly dead were actually still alive. The issue was that some people, some women would would sign their name, Mrs. and their husband's name, and a lot of women, especially of older generation, sign their name that way. And so when people looked up who voted, um, and they saw the name of the deceased person, they immediately assumed it was the deceased person, but in fact, it was actually the person's spouse. So I'm not saying that there were, dead people, did not vote, or not the dead people themselves, but someone voted for the dead people. What I'm saying is, when there's any case of fraud or issues, I think it's important for it to be fairly looked at before anybody claims fraud. If someone has a significant question, you should look at the scenario and say, was there a real issue or was there not a real issue? And if so, wait till the facts are ascertained. Don't start touting fraud. There are suspicions, and then go with it. And it could be right, could be wrong. Another thing which happened, the night of the election, is someone pointed out that they're going to say on the election night there was a problem in Michigan where a lot of votes came in 100% for Biden in one shot. And immediately people started complaining about that and saying there's fraud, that's suspicious, and lots of social media was censoring it. And the problem is everyone on both sides were wrong. What happened was there was a typo. Someone put an extra zero when they were adding one of the ballots. What happened is a lot of Biden ballots went to Biden instead of Trump in one sitting. They fixed it immediately. Now, on its face, it looked suspicious. On its face, there was something wrong. Upon further inspection, the whole thing was fixed. And the point is just simply, people are there jumping, it's wrong, it's right, it's right. I'm saying point out the incongruities and then ascertain the facts. And I think that's fair on both sides. But the problem is everybody is too quick to jump and say, this is correct or this is incorrect.
So I mostly agree with you, Joseph. I think that in general, I think that we do have to take a step back. And there's allegations of fraud, but it doesn't mean necessarily there's fraud. But however, because a president-elect Biden is most likely going to become president, it seems clear that the media has a responsibility, in my opinion. This is opinion, not fact. But in my opinion, they should state who the winner is according to what they have right now. It doesn't mean can't change, and it doesn't mean that President Trump can't exhaust all legal remedies. And it doesn't mean that President Trump exhausting remedies does not further cement our system and will help create beliefs. So one of the things that's really fantastic, what they're doing in Atlanta, is they are actually have live streaming the actual people counting ballots in the hand order. And this just helps create a better system. And one thing that's really great about this election, for example, is that voting records really shattered anything that even people thought, which was really exciting because it shows that people actually care about where the country's headed, no matter which direction you went to vote for.
I think it's just important on that one point on live streaming ballots. I think it's very contested in terms of whether live streaming is actually beneficial or not. A lot of people are claiming, you can't really see everything that's going on. Just because there's a video of someone doesn't mean you could see the tiny, blot where people could fill it in. There are claims on both sides of issues in terms of how to observe the ballots. I think it's important to steer clear from specifically what the best system or was not the best system. What should have been the issue to begin with was everyone should have agreed on what the best system to do it, and that's how it should have been measured. I think the biggest issue in this entire election isn't about fraud or anything. It's that everybody knew there was going to be a ton of ballots. Everybody knew mail-in ballots. Everyone knew there was also going to be even more ballots than have ever been before, even on election day. And still, nobody spoke about like, these are the issues we're going to face. How do we deal with it? They just figured, hopefully, it won't get screwed up that night. And I don't think there was anybody who was surprised that the election wasn't decided that night. I really didn't know anybody was like, yeah, everyone was going to know the answer. Even if the answer was leaning towards a certain candidate, it was clear nothing was going to be decided that night. And I think that's a very big problem with the system. I think the rules of the election, and I think how the election the ballots are going to be counted should have been clear to begin with. Especially, I thought it was somewhat irresponsible for the Supreme Court to reject the case from Georgia to make a decision on the mail-in ballots
Pennsylvania.
in Pennsylvania. That in Pennsylvania they were trying to figure out what happens with ballots that come after the date. Make a decision before. It was clear that a decision needed to be made, so there was no reason why. I'm not arguing for either side, but we should have been able to know what the actual rules are before an election instead of after an election. I think that's a particularly significant point.
With that in mind, let's discuss some of Biden's cabinet picks.
Yes, so obviously we really don't have so much information in general. I would say that a President Biden and a Vice President Kamala Harris have not have not necessarily been very open with the press. And during I remember when President Trump's transition, there were just a lot of floating ideas going around, but you had more idea. I don't know if it's because it's the early stages of transition or that they're being more secretive or more deliberative, but it seems that I would think that there's kind of a division within the Biden camp because this is really the first time in many years that a president's being elected and the Senate may or may not be part of the same party. So meaning we don't know if the Democrats will control the presidency and the Senate or just the presidency. And so that will make a very big impact on some of President Biden's cabinet picks. For example, Bernie Sanders is clearly vying to be labor secretary. However, a Republican-led Congress I doubt they would approve some of his more candidates. For example, Elizabeth Warren, who was vying to be Treasury Secretary, who also was one of the major supporters of the Dodd-Frank regulations back in the 2010 era, and regulating big banks. So she is from Massachusetts, which has a Republican governor. So if she was appointed to a cabinet official and confirmed, then the Republican governor would have the opportunity to appoint a senator, which could very well change the balance of the Senate. So that seems unlikely that a President Biden would pick someone like her. However, some names that have been thrown out for Treasury Secretary are like Janet Yellen, who is the former Federal Reserve Chair, who is clearly eminently qualified and also a very well-known quantity in Washington, and I would assume that she'd be confirmed almost unanimously. I do believe that the Biden camp itself is facing a conundrum on exactly which side to go because they don't know who will control the Senate, and there will be a tremendous amount of negotiations that need to be done in the cabinet that have not been done possibly ever because the American people and the Congress have become so polarized. And so the Senate is not going to, under Mitch McConnell-led Senate, is not going to confirm every single one of President Biden's picks. And even when you have control of the Senate, your party has control of it, there's still times you pick someone and then they find out something about that person and then they're not confirmed. So it's clearly helpful for President Biden that he's been worked in an administration and he has the organization already. So that might help some of the staffing. One thing to mention is that Susan Rice is considered a candidate for Secretary of State, already having been vetted as a possible VP pick for Vice President Biden. However, I'd be shocked if President Biden would pick her because she was caught in a whole Benghazi scandal, and the Republicans investigated that, and it would be highly unlikely that a Republican Senate would confirm her.
I think on that note, it's also important. New York Times reported today that there's also a lot of infighting in the Democratic Party on who President Biden should be picking as his to fill his cabinet. Nancy Pelosi specifically is very against letting him pick anyone from the Senate or from the House, and that she believes that right now in both houses the margins are very tight, and that being that there was this giant red wave in terms of the House that they expected.
Well, there wasn't a red wave. It was just an unexpected red
That's what I was
haze.
saying, that the Republican Party was really expecting to lose 10 to 15 seats, and instead as of now, it looks like they're about to gain somewhere between 10 or 15 seats. That really puts Nancy Pelosi in a hot spot, and that being that that the House is very close, she obviously doesn't want to, risk losing any seats and ruining her majority, as she's had it for as she enjoys being the Speaker of the House. And I misspoke. As she
Well,
would like.
President Biden is definitely going to pick some House Democrats for his cabinet. The question is, how many will he pick? But from safe Democratic districts, he will have no problem picking. Not a substantial amount, but definitely a few. And there are some candidates that are very interested in cabinet positions because it really is cabinet positions are very high profile and very, very impactful.
Agreed. It's very interesting also to note that one of the early criticisms of Donald Trump after he became president-elect was that it did not look like he was going to bring in any establishment Republicans into his cabinet. Everyone thought it was going to be business people or notable celebrities or whatever. And that being, he did bring certain establishment Republicans in, but it's interesting to see that in the flip scenario is coming in, where Biden's coming in. He's not, for political reasons, he's not going, not for the same reason necessarily as Trump didn't want to pick, establishment players for his cabinet, but Biden is doing it for strategic reasons, where, if he picks too many, it might put into jeopardy the House majority. With that in mind, on to our next topic, which was pretty significant, which is James Comey and Andrew McCabe. Is that how you pronounce it? McCabe? McCabe. Both have, over the last weeks, McCabe?
Yeah.
Over the last couple of weeks, have been testifying. James Comey much earlier, Andrew McCabe in the last few days, have both been testifying in court on what happened with the Steele dossier, in terms of how certain things were approved in terms of the whole
the start of the Russia investigation. President Trump.
The Russia investigation, and there was a certain point that seemed to be in conflict between the two on whether Andrew was permitted to be leaking to the news. Most recently and notably, though, Andrew McCabe did it under oath, which is very different than before. Before, it was James Comey was the only one who was under oath who denied it. Now that Andrew McCabe is under oath as of last week, it's actually become significant because now one of them can be persecuted because lying to Congress is a felony, and both of them said it under oath. So what that means is most likely there will be an investigation in the FBI.
There's not going to be an investigation.
Why not?
President Biden is going to finish those investigations, and whether or not I don't think he's going to direct the Justice Department to get involved in this, but
it might get done beforehand.
I think a Democratic Attorney General is going to put a lid on all investigations into the start of that investigation. And clearly there were irregularities, and Democrats do admit that. However, Democrats are kind of frustrated with how the Republicans keep on bringing up the Russia investigation. However, Republicans counter that that President Trump was looked into very seriously, and he should have some sort of not revenge, but some sort of investigation into why it started, because it didn't seem to be that much came out of the Mueller report.
Ted Cruz announced recently that he plans on tomorrow, actually on Monday, recording today on Sunday the 15th, So on Monday, Ted Cruz said he's going to start sending papers over to the to William Barr,
The Attorney General.
the Attorney General, to begin an inquiry on publicizing documents related to this issue. So again, we'll see
Yeah, I
how.
understand that, Joseph, but a lot of letters are sent to the Justice Department and none of them are answered.
That's
And I
fair.
don't think there's much going to happen here, and not much news to be drawn out from there, especially with the President Biden coming.
So we'll see what happens in the coming weeks. I think that's going to be a hot topic for many in the coming weeks. We'll see what happens. Right. With that in mind, let's discuss something, non-presidential related, which I thought was very significant, which was actually going to change. I saw a couple of things happening in several industries, which are actually going to change, significantly a lot of businesses and a lot of industries. Recently, Apple announced that it's going to be creating its own chip for the laptop, for its laptop called the M1 chip, M1 processor, and it's going to. And historically, Apple has used many of the big players for its chips, including NVIDIA, including Intel, including Qualcomm, in terms of supplying its chips. So now that Apple is going to be doing it in-house, being that Apple is not just one of the largest and most dedicated, hardware company out there, but also one of the largest growing hardware companies. It's very important. People don't realize that Apple actually is not number one in any market in the world. Most people have this perception Apple's the largest company in the world. It's got to be number one. It's not even close to number one in many, many markets. And being that there's a lot of room for Apple hardware to be spreading into other countries, particularly India, China, and even in the United States, there's still a lot of room for growth in terms of market penetration for Apple. This is extremely significant in that you have the highest growing, or the most potential for a company to grow. And now a lot of microprocessing or process manufacturers are going to be cut out of the game. I saw similarly also McDonald's recently announced that it's opening its new plant. It's a new plant for its line called McPlant, which is going to be for plant-based meats. Recently Beyond the Meat and the Impossible and the makers of the Impossible Burger, the Impossible Company, both have announced, have been supplying many of the big chain companies with meat alternatives, and it's particularly significant that now companies are looking to themselves to do it in-house. Many of these alternative meat options have been growing in popularity, and especially if companies are going to start doing it in-house, it's going to put a lot of pressure on these on the producers. And as we see, and being that these major companies are now changing the layout of the game, they were relying on other companies, but now they're going to be doing things in-house. It's important to know what's going to happen with a lot of the other large and top tier players. Are the non-consumer direct companies, meaning the companies that particularly manufacture things, is there going to be a trend where a downwards trend for them, where a lot of the larger companies are now building things in-house, especially with the specialization in a lot of companies? Apple, in particular, if you note, they try not to rely on other people. They slowly build up their brand in terms of, they used to be buying headphones from other places. Now they build their own headphones. They bought Beats for that purpose. They originally were relying on other programming software, but very early on they decided they were only going to use iOS. And we see a trend in many other companies that they're trying to build off their own platforms, whether it be in the food industry, whether it be in tech, whether it be even in the car industry. If you look at Tesla is relying now for a lot of its software on other companies, but you'll note slowly they're trying to take over with their own programming softwares. So it's going to be a big question on non-direct to consumer companies, what's going to be coming up.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting discussion to have. Really, with this, what's called vertical integration, is trying to cut out suppliers to drive down costs. I think it's obviously going to be very difficult sometimes to, for example, for Apple to make microchips is probably Not something that they're used to doing, but it might make sense business-wise if they could try prices lower. I'm not sure if they will be able to. I do think that's always any supplier to any commercial companies have to be aware that sometimes a company will become very big and say, why do I need you in the process? And that's why the companies need to make sure they are making the most efficient product possible and specialize to maintain their market share.
Yeah. Again, if you remember notably earlier this year, you could imagine pre-COVID, one of the big stories was that FedEx and Amazon are no longer going to be partners anymore, and that Amazon pretty much is trying to put FedEx out of business. And they're still partners with UPS, and it's pretty clear that down the line UPS is going to be almost irrelevant. Give it time for Amazon, but you see that many of these companies are trying to again specialize. It's a very big question. Then but can they do that? Meaning it's very difficult. It's very difficult to scale, and especially if you take a lot of these companies, take Amazon, take McDonald's, take Apple. They are known particularly for their quality. Maybe I don't know about McDonald's. I've never had it personally, but many of these even Tesla, a lot of these companies are top tier companies. If they have one glitch, one big error in one of their products, that's it. They rely on having quality products every year. If one year their product they mess up, one year they're building their own product and suddenly it doesn't, it's not as good as, the next Intel chip, next NVIDIA chip, there goes a big piece of Apple's market share. Apple built its entire image. Amazon built its entire image on, being efficient, being timely, being, ahead of everyone else in their industry. Should they not actually be able to facilitate that? That's actually a humongous risk on them. Beforehand, they could always blame it on Intel. And even if there was a problem, and even if there was a problem, though, there were other bridges to be made. And which has happened historically. There's a time where certain NVIDIA chips were not in Apple in particular. There was a big issue with that, and millions of phones had problems with it. But what happened was Apple just went to Intel and said, they have a bridge there. They just, print some more for us. But if they burn down all those bridges, it's going to be a lot harder for Apple to supplement any infrastructure issue. And same thing with Amazon, where if you think about it, Amazon has been getting killer rates with every shipping company. They burnt that bridge. If Amazon has any issues, it's going to be very difficult for them to stay competitive. And I think that you're going to see the same thing in every industry. And you might even see some companies under pressure because of that.